Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today is another special day. We get to finally talk about the final kind of PSP console in the PSP lineup besides the PlayStation Vita lineup, and that is actually the PSP Go. Now, I've done a video on this last year. A lot of you guys loved it, and so far I've hit on every single PSP console up to the PSP Go. I just have the PSP Street, which is right after this, and then I'm going to talk about the PS Vitas. And one thing I loved about this console lineup is just how much the iterations truly did change each thing that was going on at that time. If you remember with the PSP, the original one, people wanted a portable PlayStation, and that's what this thing was. They wanted something that could play super graphically intensive games, and that's what people got. And I still even think the first PlayStation is still like a very, very great console. I literally love that thing to death. And this one, the PSP Go, it kind of took a really different approach, and I really think it kind of backfired on them greatly. I'm not really too sure why they went this route. I feel like they could have done a whole different route with it, but it is what it is. They've already done it. This thing came out in 2009, so over 11 years ago. And funny enough, when this thing came out, it wasn't set to replace the whole entire PSP lineup because it was kind of announced alongside the PSP 3000, which was, still the main selling point, I guess. That was still like the PSP 2000 successor, but the PSP Go was just a console above that I kind of alluded to, maybe like the iPhone 11 Pro Max. So we have the iPhone 11 Pro and the 11 Pro Max, which is a more expensive model. Either or, it was kind of a weird decision to do that, but a lot of people still liked it. So I think the biggest thing about the PSP Go was definitely the removal of the UMD drive. And if you don't know what that drive was, it was basically the game slot in the back. The PSP game cartridges were so strange. I think, some people actually thought you had to take apart the CD, the plastic covering, and then put the CD in, but that's not the case. And Sony actually removed that when they made the PSP Go, which I think in a way was probably a smarter decision long term. But I think at that time in 2009, it was just kind of weird because people had all these UMD slots and UMD cards that they had, from the games that they couldn't utilize anymore, and they had to either rebuy all the games online or just play different games on their PSP Go. And I think that's probably what a ton of people did. I think a lot of people also probably modded their PSP Go's to play PSP ISOs and PSP images and PSP games on the go using their game cartridges. But I think at the end of the day, it was kind of a weird thing. I don't know why they did that. Now, with the PSP Go, it had 16 gigabytes of internal storage, but you could buy that memory card, the memory stick micro, whatever it was, and put that in that and expand the storage up to 32 gigabytes, which was cool. And the one thing that was kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing was probably the battery. And I'm reading this a lot from PlayStationPortable.fandom.com. Again, shout out to them. They keep it locked down over there. Now, the battery within it, like I was saying, is not removable, which is kind of a bad thing. If you looked at the 3000 and the 2000 and the 1000, those were all removable, and this one was not, which kind of sucked. It might have not been a big deal to a lot of people. It was barely even a big deal to me when I bought it because I don't really use it at all. But it was a weird thing, It's kind of like what we see with every single manufacturer out there that has a battery in their device. We're talking phones and all these other consoles and devices. As they get more and more into the market share, as they get more and more popular, they tend to steal that battery in so people have an excuse to keep upgrading. And, it's a really smart thing these manufacturers are doing, but it's a really annoying thing for us consumers. Now, the PSP Go was 43% lighter and 56% smaller than the original PSP 1000, and it was 16% lighter and 35% smaller than the PSP 3000. And on the front, it had a 3.8-inch LCD, which was kind of weird because the previous models, the PSP 3000, the 1000, all those ones, had 4.3-inch screens on those ones, and that was kind of a weird thing. You're getting a smaller display on it, but the display really wasn't that bad, and I think that was probably one of its highlights. The coolest thing about this gaming console is that it did slide up to reveal the D-pad and basically all the controls that you can mess with on this gaming console. And I think it was a very interesting design. I think when they were marketing it and showing it to people, I think it was definitely a huge selling factor. It was so weird and so different that a lot of people paid attention to it. And I think that's what Sony was pretty much trying to do. They're trying to get people to go and use this console and try to get this into as many hands as possible. And in order for them to do that, they had to make some weird decisions. And I think by them doing this, it was actually a very, very smart thing to do. They ended up selling, I think, quite a bit of consoles, and I think it was a pretty decent ending point to the PSP lineup besides the PSP Street, which I think might have been an even better ending to the lineup. But the weird thing about the PSP Go, like I've stated before, was actually a different charging port, which was different, and it was different from the original PSPs. But the main thing, and as I've said before, was that UMD slot removal, because like I've stated before, so many people had those many gaming cards and game slots and games from the original PSPs, they had to remove or do something else with to go to the PSP Go. And I think that really encouraged people to mod their devices, and it's funny because this really kind of teed up the way for mobile gaming to happen, and I think that's what Sony was trying to do. They were trying to get ahead of the curve. They knew people, at the time Androids were out, iPhones were out, and the app stores were, developing great games for those consoles, for those phones and everything, and these gaming console manufacturers knew they were going to lose market share if they didn't go and up in the ante and do something different. And I think this way, like I said, they were trying to go that route, but at the same time it backfired because a lot of people at the same time didn't want to buy new game cards for these specific consoles and just didn't want to buy all their games online, and that was one of the bigger problems. Most people liked getting games and bringing them on the go and all those things, and now it was a little bit harder to do that for sure, or they had to go buy new games all the time. So it probably made Sony a bunch of money at the time. Now the PSP Go also supported Bluetooth, which was new at the time, and it was kind of funny saying that now, I feel like everything has Bluetooth, or the cameras have Bluetooth, you know what I mean? But this thing got introduced with Bluetooth at the time, which is awesome. And so going on with that UMD thing, this was the only console at the time that all the games had to be downloaded straight from the PlayStation Store, so there was no other way to really get it. But it's funny because they said all downloadable PSP and PlayStation games available for older PSP models were to be compatible with the PSP Go, and Sony also confirmed that all UMD-based PSP games released on after October 1st, 2009 would be available for download. And it's weird because the PlayStation Store for the PSP eventually shut down on March 15, 2016, so there was really no way to go about it, and like I said, the whole thing kind of backfired. It was a very weird thing at the end of the day, and I think they should have just done the UMD thing. Nintendo, if you see them, they still haven't shied away from that specific thing, and eventually with the PS Vita, they eventually fixed it, and they eventually made another game slot for that thing for you could import your games and everything. But if you look at the DS Lite, look at the original DS, and look at the 3DS XL that came out in the 2DS XL, all those things still have those game slots, and it's almost the exact same game slots from before. It's like every single game is exactly the same size. Obviously 3DS games will not work on the DS and DS Lite and all those, but still you kind of have to give Nintendo credit for maintaining that type of consistency. From the first console they put out in the DS lineup to the last console, it still has pretty much the same gaming cartridge, which is really nice. You can easily go to a GameStop, go to anywhere and pick up a game, and with the PSP Go, that wasn't necessarily the case. And if you look at us now, if you look at our iPhones and Androids, it is a little bit of a different story. We download all of our apps from the App Store. It's not like we go somewhere and go to Walmart and pick up a new app and then come back and download it on our phone and put it in our phone. That's not how it works. But I think games are just a little bit different right now, especially with dedicated gaming consoles. We're so used to going places and all this stuff, and I think the PSP Go, more than anything, was ahead of its time. I think that's the best way I can put it. I think at that time people weren't willing to change, and I think if a gaming console comes out like this again, I think the industry will have probably a better take on it. I think they'll definitely take it much better, and they won't really do like how the PSP Go was. I think the reception of the PSP Go was pretty weird. People were saying it was too expensive, and some people, and at the time actually it was only $50 cheaper than the PlayStation 3. And if you think about it, I think I would rather at that time have a PlayStation 3 than a PSP Go, if I'm being honest. And that's no knock to the PSP Go. I do like it. It has a lot going for it. But I think for people to kind of shift over to this, they're missing out on so many things, yet it's a more expensive console. I don't really know how that really flew down on people's radar. Even for me to pick it up now, back in last year, I picked it up last year. This thing costed me almost $100 to pick up, and this thing has not depreciated that much since its release. I mean, obviously yes it has, but it kind of hit a depreciation point and then it stopped depreciating. So these things are not only hard to get, but they're super expensive to get as well for a 2009 gaming console. For example, I picked up my PlayStation 3 for about $40, something like that. It was not expensive at all. So my PlayStation 3 was more expensive, it was much cheaper actually than my PSP Go, which is insane. And I think the build quality of the PSP Go is a really cool thing, but I just think the overall reception and everything was just such a strange way to go about it. I think the Sony Xperia Play was a super cool concept, and I own one, and I wish they kind of kept going further on it, but they eventually stopped it. And I think if another PlayStation phone came out, they would probably end up doing much better this time around than they would before. So I guess the PSP Go is still worth it in 2020. I would say it's more of a collector's item, just like any other PSP. If you guys own a PSP Go or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your experience on it. Like I said, PSP Street video is probably going to come out in the next couple days, and that will end the PSP lineup video of this year. I might make like other videos later on this year, but we'll see what happens. But that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Check out the links in the description as well. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys would check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.